They didn't even save me a seat. The mahogany chairs were all filled when I arrived. And no one looked up. Not my stepmother Verena, still draped in her black lace veil like a southern queen. Not my half-brother Thane, already tapping away on his phone like he had better places to be. Just the lawyer, Mr. Whittaker, nodding politely, motioning for me to stand at the back. So I did. Like an unwanted guest at my own father's funeral. They said this was a family-only reading. But when it came to me, they made sure I was reminded. I was only family in technicality. Daughter from the first marriage. Born to the woman no one in this room dared speak about anymore. The woman who taught me how to read land maps before I learned to ride a bike. The woman Verena made sure to erase, picture by picture, title by title. Mr. Whittaker cleared his throat. As executor of the Mercer estate, I'll now begin the reading of the will of Howard Lowell Mercer. Everyone straightened in their seats. Thane leaned back, smirking. Verena pulled out a gold pen like she was about to sign something already. To my beloved wife, Verena, I leave the contents of the main residence at Oakshade Estate, excluding items designated elsewhere. To my son, Thane Mercer, I leave the administrative rights to Mercer Holdings and the adjacent warehouse properties in Chatham and Glynn counties. And to Calliope Mercer. All heads turned. That's me, Calliope. But everyone calls me Callie, except them. They mostly call me her. To Calliope, I leave the 1922 Wurlitzer baby grand piano in the garden hall, originally belonging to her mother, along with access to all remaining family documents for a period of 30 days. Silence, then came the laughter, low and restrained from Verena first. He left her a piano, she said, almost choking on the word. Well, that should suit her perfectly, something decorative, pointless, just like her career. My cheeks burned, not from shame, but recognition. Recognition that this wasn't grief. It was ceremony, a coronation, and I wasn't part of the kingdom. If that concludes everything, Thane said, standing, we should get started on asset transition. Timing's tight before the tax resets next quarter. Verena nodded, already reaching for her fur coat, like the room was too cold for her greatness. No one thanked me for coming. No one even asked how I was doing. I stepped outside as the sun dipped behind the cypress trees, that old Georgian light casting gold across the wrought iron gates. I could still hear Verena's laugh as the front door clicked shut behind me. But what they didn't know, what none of them even thought to check, was that the piano they mocked me for, it wasn't just a piano. And the key I found wedged in its lid that night, it wasn't for music. It was for something older, deeper, and legally binding. Something my mother left behind not for them. But for me, I didn't cry on the way home. I didn't scream. I just opened my laptop, logged into an encrypted folder only I had access to, and clicked on the document labeled Title Origin Deed, Western Grove Parcel, Mercer Matrilineal Trust. And right there, buried beneath the surface of everything they thought they owned, was proof that I owned the land they were sitting on. The deed wasn't scanned like a modern PDF. It was a photo, blurry, cropped, faded at the edges. But the seal was real. The signature, unmistakable, my mother's name, looped and firm. Western Grove Parcel, 43, 7 acres, deeded jointly to Evelyn Ashcroft Mercer and heirs of the Ashcroft bloodline. That land was never meant to belong to the Mercer estate. It was hers. And by law, it was mine. They hadn't stolen it. Not yet. But they were living on it, building warehouses, throwing garden galas, and promising investors total ownership of a piece of ground that didn't legally belong to them. Because buried under their tennis courts and imported rose beds was my mother's signature. The land beneath their empire was Ashcroft land, and they never even knew. I spent the entire night scanning through files my mother left behind. Property surveys, handwritten notes, letters between her and a local zoning official, all hidden inside a folder my father had encrypted, then forgotten. A note was taped at the end of the packet. If anything happens, Callie will know where to start. I didn't cry, but I did smile just a little. It wasn't revenge I wanted, it was restoration. The next morning, I made one call. Elia's row picked up on the second ring. Callie. Wow, I didn't expect, are you okay? He was the only person from that old world I still trusted. Once my best friend in high school, now a systems architect in Savannah's growing smart city initiative. I need your help, I said. And I need complete confidentiality. Of course. How fast can we verify a pre-2000 land deed through the county registrar and get a soft title block in place? If you've got a scan, 48 hours, maybe less. Why? I sent him the photo. Within seconds, he called back. Is this real? As real as the dirt under their feet. That week was a blur of hidden moves. I filed a quiet legal hold through a proxy trust, Ashcroft Renewal Holdings. I submitted a claim of partial ownership with intent to partition. I cross-referenced zoning histories, building violations, water rights, and easement lines. And I did it all under one rule. No one in the Mercer house could trace any of it back to me, but the clock was ticking. Verena and Thane had already announced an expansion plan for Mercer Holdings, right on Western Grove parcel. A massive new storage and freight terminal, worth tens of millions, funded by investors who had no idea the ground they were building on was legally disputed. They didn't check. They didn't care, because they thought they'd won, that I was gone, powerless. A failed artist with a piano and a past. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't fighting them in courtrooms. I was undermining them from underneath. Literally. On day 7, Elia sent me a message. It's done. Ashcroft Renewal Holdings is now on public record as co-owner of Western Grove. And we've placed a stop order on all building permits related to that land. You just shut down their expansion, overnight. I stared at the screen. My heart wasn't racing. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt steady, like I had finally stepped onto ground that was truly mine. But this was just the beginning, because I wasn't done. They didn't just build their empire on stolen land. They built it on stolen legacy. And it was time to take it back, not by shouting, but by owning. I named it Ashcroft Renewal Holdings for a reason. Renewal, not revenge. But to the world, it would look like any other obscure LLC, buried in legal fog and offshore addresses. A shell company. But this time, the shell had memory. It remembered the woman they tried to erase. And it spoke for her now, louder than any voice I'd ever dared to use. Elias handled the legal work like clockwork. He knew which doors to knock on, which registrars to avoid, and which law firms sold discretion by the hour. By the time the sun rose again, we had a Delaware registration, a Cayman holding pattern, a Virginia-based family office acting as a front, and no trace of my name. Even if Thane dug through every document with a microscope, he wouldn't find Callie Mercer anywhere. He'd find board members with names like Lyndon Worth and Kara Rothwell. Fake, legal, perfect. You're sure you want to do this? Elias asked. They used my silence to claim power, I said. Now I'm using their arrogance to take it back. Because here's the thing about empires built on ego. They don't notice what's missing until the foundation is gone. While Verena gave interviews about legacy leadership, and Thane posted LinkedIn sermons about generational wealth, I was quietly buying out every lien, loan, and disputed title attached to Mercer Holdings. A forgotten contractor who'd never been paid. A corner parcel owned by an old friend of my mother, S. A tax claim tied to a historical preservation permit they'd never completed. One by one, we acquired them all, and the best part, every deal came through Ashcroft Renewal Holdings, and every signature was mine. But it wasn't enough to own the pieces. They needed to feel the pressure, so we launched the audit. A quiet, third-party investigation, posing as an investment fund doing due diligence. We questioned zoning, We reviewed water rights. We pulled records from 5 years ago that no one thought mattered. And within a week, the calls started. Thane left me a voicemail. His voice was tight. "Hey, Callie. Heard you might know something about this Ashcroft group looking into our land portfolio. Just wondering if we could chat sometime." Family to family. I didn't call back. I wasn't family anymore. At least not to them. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror. And for the first time in years, I didn't see someone broken, or quiet, or forgotten. I saw the reflection of every woman who'd ever been cut out of the frame. And I said it out loud. Not for anyone else, just for me. They built their world on a mirror, but I'm holding the real house now. The shell was in place. The pressure had started. Now it was time to step out of the shadows and show them exactly who they'd tried to erase. It was a single email, just a plain, formal memo sent to Mercer Holdings, Board of Trustees, city officials, and 3 key development partners. Subject line: Notice of intent to redevelop Western Grove parcel, ownership transfer initiated. The sender, Ashcroft Renewal Holdings. The reaction, immediate chaos. Verena called an emergency board meeting. Thane canceled a speaking engagement in Atlanta. Articles began surfacing in the local business section. Mystery firm acquires historic Mercer land. Who is behind Ashcroft Renewal? Inside Mercer Holdings, panic grew like ivy on crumbling brick. "It's probably a shell for a competitor," one board member said. "Someone's trying to tank our expansion," another whispered. "Can we buy them out?" Thane snapped. But they couldn't buy what they didn't understand. Because Ashcroft Renewal wasn't just a company, it was a message. 3 days after the email, I made my move public, still veiled but deliberate. I purchased a full-page ad in the Savannah Legacy Journal. The headline was quiet, almost poetic. "Sometimes the land remembers what people forget." Ashcroft Renewal Holdings is proud to restore and protect the original boundaries of Western Grove, land entrusted by Evelyn Ashcroft Mercer to her heirs. All current development proposals will be paused pending cultural and legal review. For inquiries, please contact our legal counsel at Haldon and Pritchard LLP. No names, no photos. Just silence, speaking louder than anything they'd ever said to me. That night, Verena's voice echoed through a voicemail she didn't mean to leave. "She's behind this. I don't care what anyone says. That girl, she's always been too quiet for her own good, just like her mother." And that was when I knew. She was scared, not of losing the land, but of being seen by it, by the truth buried beneath their empire. Elias sent me a screenshot the next morning. It was from a local blog, already making waves on social media. Insiders suggest Mercer land ownership dispute tied to first marriage of Howard Mercer. Could the forgotten daughter be reclaiming what's rightfully hers? No one had named me yet, but they would, and I was ready. I stood outside Oakshade Estate that evening, my old home, watching it from the sidewalk like a stranger. The light in Thane's office was still on. He was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, face red with panic. A week ago, I'd stood in that same position during the will reading, invisible. Now, they were staring at shadows because the shadow had teeth. They wanted a war of public opinion. I wanted something else. Something they couldn't control, couldn't spin, couldn't bury, ownership. They had mocked my piano. They had erased my mother. They had forgot that real power doesn't always show up in the room. Sometimes it owns the room and waits. And that's what I was doing now. Waiting, because the next step wouldn't be an email, it would be a knock on the door. It wasn't loud. Just 2 calm, deliberate taps on the heavy oak door of Mercer Holdings, executive wing. But it hit like thunder. Inside, Thane was mid-sentence, raving to the city liaison about legal overreach and zoning sabotage. Verena sat stone-faced, fingers tightening around her pearl bracelet, her voice lower than usual brittle. "Whoever they are," she hissed, "we'll bury them in court." "We've already launched a motion to dismiss their claim," Thane added. "They'll crawl away once they realize who they're messing with. Then came the knock. 2 taps, silence, 1 more tap. A junior assistant opened the door, hesitant, pale. There's a representative here from Ashcroft Renewal." Silence fell. You could hear the air conditioner hum. "Tell them we're not accepting visitors without legal counsel," Verena snapped. But I was already stepping in. No announcement, no entourage, just me. In a navy blazer, plain flats, no makeup, hair pulled back like I used to wear it when I tagged along with my dad to zoning committee meetings as a kid. I didn't look like a billionaire heiress. I didn't need to. Because I wasn't here to impress them. I was here to remind them. Verena stood, not out of respect but to assert control. Thane froze. "Callie," he said, his voice cracked in disbelief. You're Ashcroft Renewal." "No," I replied. "Ashcroft Renewal is a holding entity." I pulled out a folder and set it gently on the table. Inside, signed copies of the trust deed, land plat overlays, time-stamped purchase records. I'm its founder, and the rightful heir to Western Grove, via matrilineal trust. You've been developing land that was never yours." Verena didn't move, but her eyes did, flicking to every corner of the room like a trapped bird. "You can't just walk in here and—" "Actually," I interrupted, "I can. This meeting was requested through legal protocol. You accepted the invite. I'm here to deliver final notice of lease termination for all non-permitted structures built past the original 1980 boundary line." Thane's face turned ghost white. He knew what that meant. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I opened the second folder. Pages 14 through 27 are drone-verified site violations. Pages 28 through 36 are purchase records for every unpaid contractor you ghosted between 2020 and 2024, each of whom sold their lien to Ashcroft Renewal. "This isn't how family handles things," Verena hissed. "You're right," I said quietly, "but you made that choice. When you laughed during the will reading, when you erased my mother, when you turned legacy into leverage." They didn't have a response. They only had silence. Not the kind that falls when people listen. The kind that happens when a fortress finally realizes the ground beneath it is no longer solid. "So what do you want?" Thane asked finally. "Money, a stake." I looked at him, really looked. The boy who used to throw garden parties on my side of the property. The man who posted about success while trampling over his own bloodline. "I don't want your money," I said. "I want my name back on the land where it belongs. I want the truth restored. I want the past unburied." And then I paused. "You have 30 days to vacate the expansion zone. The original estate will remain under investigation for preservation violations. All future correspondence will go through my counsel." I turned to leave. No slamming doors, no grand gestures. Just the quiet power of a knock that was finally answered. And behind me, for the first time ever, they stayed silent. They tried to deny it at first. Press releases were drafted, carefully worded statements sent to shareholders. An unexpected legal misunderstanding. An alleged trust deed under review. Our team is confident this issue will be resolved swiftly and without disruption. But the disruption had already begun. Because power doesn't vanish in explosions. It erodes, like rot in a mansion's foundation. The city froze their permits. The state launched an investigation into zoning fraud. Contractors pulled out of the expansion project overnight. Thane's LinkedIn went silent. Verena canceled 3 appearances with the Historic Preservation Council, and a local reporter published a story titled, "The Ashcroft Heir, Did Mercer Holdings Build on Stolen Land?" The article didn't name me, but it didn't have to, because by then, everyone already knew. Inside Oakshade Estate, things turned quiet, not the serene kind. The tense kind, like a storm had passed but left the windows cracked open. Thane stopped returning investor calls. A board member resigned. Another leaked documents showing just how much they'd borrowed against future expansions. Expansions now ruled illegal. And beneath it all, beneath the business suits, the press releases, the floral arrangements still dying in the front hallway, was fear, not fear of me, but fear of what I'd revealed, that they were never as untouchable as they believed. Elias sent me a text. Oakshade's historic designation just got revoked, based on violations you submitted. The main house can't apply for federal funding anymore. I stared at the screen. It didn't make me smile. Not exactly, because this wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about consequence. The kind no one could laugh off with wine glasses and thin smiles. Verena finally called. Her voice was softer now, not syrupy, just tired. Calliope, I want to speak, woman to woman. Now I'm a woman, I said. How convenient. She hesitated. Then, I know I wasn't kind, but I was protecting the name, the legacy. You weren't protecting anything, I said. You were polishing the outside of a house while burning the inside. So what now? You take it all. No, I replied. I reclaim what was mine, the land, the voice, and the right to decide what Oakshade becomes. 30 days later, Mercer Holdings vacated the disputed parcel. Their expansion contracts collapsed. And in the county records, for the first time in over 40 years, the name Evelyn Ashcroft Mercer appeared again, tied to rightful ownership of Western Grove. I didn't throw a press conference. I didn't post a victory thread. I just walked the land at dusk, barefoot, like I used to when I was little. Back when Dad taught me how to trace a boundary line with nothing but chalk and instinct. Back when Mom would say, land doesn't belong to people. People belong to land. All we do is listen. So I listened, and it was quiet, but not hollow, quiet like something just beginning. I didn't tear Oakshade down. I could have. The new zoning powers gave me the right to flatten the Mercer estate and sell it parcel by parcel. Developers made offers, big ones, but Oakshade wasn't just a house. It was a wound. And wounds, if you're patient enough, don't need to be burned away. They need to be regrown. So I started with the garden. The one my mother used to sketch in the margins of her journals, winding paths, native plants, open to everyone. It took months, pulling weeds that had been allowed to grow for decades, uncovering stone markers buried beneath years of denial, replacing status with purpose. We repurposed the West Wing into a community design lab, free for local students, especially girls interested in architecture and environmental science. We turned the ballroom into a quiet study hall with solar glass ceilings and reclaimed wood beams, a space for people who were told, like I once was, that silence equals weakness. And on the front gate, carved into aged copper, we engraved a single line. For those who were left out of the will, but never out of the soil. Thane never showed up again. Verena sent one final letter, short, handwritten. Calliope, I never saw you coming. Now I can't look away. Do what I never could, build something that outlasts the name. No signature, just a small drawing in the corner. It was the piano, the one she once mocked, sketched carefully by her own hand. I stood in the main hallway that evening, barefoot, like I had as a child. The walls didn't feel cold anymore, because the house was no longer theirs, and strangely, it had never been just mine either. It was everyone's who had ever been told they didn't belong, everyone who was cut out of rooms they helped build, everyone who was laughed at during the reading of a will, and still chose to plant something anyway. So if you ask me how it ended, I'd say, it didn't end. It finally began, not with noise, but with roots, deep, unshakable, and fully mine.